Good evening, Dr. Huckins and classmates. My name is Tanisha Parham Kelly. My research project is titled Surviving the Beautiful 2021. The reason I chose this title is because I wanted to acknowledge the fact that, in spite of the obstacles we're going to discuss during this project, the people continue to survive. So let's jump right into it. Diving right into the pool off the deep side, we're going to start with the introduction. African Americans today are far better off than their African ancestors and African American predecessors. However, there is still a battle to obtain full equality for their community. There are at least 3 reasons that proves this statement to be true. First, many American leaders continue to support white supremacy and racial inequality. Second, the media has forced negative representation of the Black community through powerful images and literature. And lastly, African American communities are drastically affected by systemic racism, which makes everyday life challenging. It might be said that African Americans are not treated unjustly, but I respond that the African American community is treated unjustly, and the community needs help. In the beginning of my paper, I chose to discuss some of the founding fathers or the first few presidents that were actually known to be racist and supporters of white supremacy. I felt that this was important because they actually laid the foundation to America and are really the reason why African American people and other minorities are still fighting the injustices that they are fighting today. A lot of them stemmed from or are the exact same as the ones that their African ancestors were fighting then, and also the newly freed African American ancestors faced then. So it was really important for me to include. I think if there's a total of 10 in my actual research paper that I mentioned, but for the sake of time, I chose to show you these 3, which are the 3rd President Thomas Jefferson, the 5th President James Monroe, and the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson. In my research paper, I also discuss our former president, who was actually still the president at the time when I started this research paper nearly 3 years ago, and his connections to white supremacy, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and just the thought process that comes with that group of people. It's really hard to accept that there are still people that think this way. And of course it is not all, but there are still many, and most of them are representatives in our American government. This man next to Donald Trump is Stephen Miller, who I have a nice amount of information on in my research, and he is actually a known white supremacist, and he was someone that advised President Trump and actually was probably responsible for a lot of the things that he said and did, and a lot of the ways that President Trump offended minorities of all ethnic backgrounds. I'm sure, well, it is my opinion that Stephen Miller, his advisor, most likely advised him in a way to where Trump felt comfortable mentioning these things and comfortable saying these things about these people, all because they look different and they are not the same race as he. The following is a graph that I included in order for you to be able to visualize the lack of minority representation in politics even though the numbers have grown as of late. We have a minority vice president, and we've had a minority president in both Senator or Vice President Kamala Harris and the President Barack Obama. There is still, a great lack of representation of minorities in politics. And in my research paper, I go further and discuss how this affects the African American community specifically in their everyday life, and how their family dynamics are ran, and activities of daily living are conducted when you have a lack of representation in politics. This next slide shows a representation of my second point in my thesis, which is that mass media sabotages the Black image. And it does. It's all over the news. It's in books, history books. It's on reality television. It's on sitcoms, billboards, and if you were to believe what the mass media feeds about the African American community, then it would be really easy for you to display some implicit racism, and to be fearful, and it's really sad. And so this is one of my number one most favorite things to discuss with people who are not really familiar with the way that the mass media controls the masses. Here we look specifically at how the mass media portrays the Black man, and this is just a great caricature that I found on the internet that really just shows a great example of something that is often done, where the white counterpart will do something worse or on the same level, and the African American counterpart will be painted as a monster, or in this case, Richard Sherman was painted as a thug, as opposed to Congressman Mike Grimm or Justin Bieber. In my research paper, I also discuss different scenarios where Black men are treated more harshly than their white counterparts through the media, when just showing things like arrests, or going further into their family history to pull things out to make them look really bad. Here we have a classic by Harriet Beecher Stowe, who was a white abolitionist who created this story called Uncle Tom's Cabin, it's just a classic. I enjoyed reading the book. I had never read the whole thing until I became a student here at Ashford. And then once I had to write several papers on the book, I did realize Harriet Beecher Stowe, she was trying to do a good thing, but it really turned out to be a big negative, because the media, as they do, they were able to change the narrative. And also there were these sisters who are shown on the right, the Duncan sisters, who took their show on the road, where one sister played Eva, who was the pretty perfect porcelain child, and then there was Topsy, who was clearly African American. She was a slave girl, and the Duncan sisters decided to do blackface well into the 1930s, I believe, before they took their show off the road. And so this was really important for me to include, because even back then the media grabbed onto Topsy and really just created her to be this raggedy, they call her basically everything short of just a flat out monster. In the book, the media grabbed onto this and felt that it was necessary to display this portrait of this little black girl all over the place. And so this is really important as far as representation goes, because black children need to see themselves in a positive light, so that they can be able to combat some of the things that are going to come their way. It starts early, is my belief. And so, yeah, this Uncle Tom's Cabin, Topsy and Eva, was really important for me to include in my research paper, and the psychology behind it and how it affects the black community, especially the children, was very important to me also. My third main idea of my thesis has to do with systemic racism. This slide shows a nice little graph or data source of mass incarceration. And this in particular one shows the lifetime likelihood of imprisonment for U.S. residents born in 2001. You can see the disproportion that we have here, and it's really important that the black community educates themselves on these numbers, so that they can try to figure out how to combat these things. And they need help. Somebody needs to step in and step up and help them out. I mean, the numbers, they're here and they speak for themselves. And in my research paper, I definitely dive deeper into this one, because I think it's really important. Yeah, the fact that black men are going to jail, 1 in 3 will go to jail, or is likely to go to jail for a lifetime, is a trickle-down effect, because men and fathers are very important to family dynamics. And so when you lose a father, it trickles down, and other things, other issues start to happen, and life just gets harder. Another form of systemic racism is environmental racism. And as this photograph says, it's not new. And it is actually causing a lot of health issues within the community, and nobody is talking about it. And a lot of the reason why is because they don't even realize that this is the reason why they're having all of these issues in their lives, and not just physical, but their mental health is affected by their environment. And so it was important for me to discuss this in my research paper, and hopefully have some really good points to help some people change some of their daily habits, and strive for a better a way to get to a better environment. So in order to wrap up my presentation, out of respect for the time limit that we have, I have decided to just kind of share this. The African American community is obviously treated unjustly, and African Americans do need help. So in my paper, I include some suggestions and tips on how to combat negativity, and how to survive in America when you are a minority and you're finally aware of the tactics of white supremacy. And so some of those include having a relationship with a higher power, a spiritual relationship with whoever you believe your creator to be, because that makes you powerful. And it is definitely the first step to overcoming all negativity in life. The second is to be physically healthy and to be mentally healthy, and both of those are affected by your diet and your environment. And so once you're aware of the environmental racism that's caused by systemic racism, you should be able to figure out ways to combat that in order to be able to combat any negativity, especially white supremacy. So, thank you for listening, and I hope that I've enlightened you in some way or made you think of a way that you can help make America a little more fair for minorities. And I appreciate you all for listening, and have a good evening.